where you have made people think that news is another part of entertainment, that between 7 to 7:30, there is a comedy show that is relatively serious.
I don't think the media is in any way, shape, or form dumb. I don't think that is the case. I think they know exactly what they're doing.
The role of the media is outside of just coming to regurgitate what a politician said. And I feel as if what media fails to do is set their own agenda such that politicians have to play to that agenda.
We have a problem with the current status quo of media ownership.
That it may not be owned by certain people, rather politicians, but it has certain elements that are very political.
For us to get to a place of objectivity in media, one, we have to deconstruct the idea of media personalities. So tell it as it is. She doesn't have to be too pretty, she doesn't have to be too bougie. It just has to be the story.
And that is what the media needs to do, to report as outliers.
But what do we know? That he wanted to pick an extra wife from where? From Kisumu town. How is that not desensitized media reporting?
Whether you feel it is relevant or not, the president wants another wife from Kisumu.
We of course need to hear that the president wants to take another wife, but we also need to hear he was going to look for ABCD and thought, wow, I can take another wife.
Give me more till I say, I don't understand. Bring an analyst. I don't understand. I don't like, it's too much.
Dry out the papers from the conglomerates. If anything, wrap the meat using those papers.
Do your job. There is no getting away with it. Sit there, do what they're doing.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to yet another episode of the Debate Circle. And in today's conversation, we'll be tackling the topic on BBI, the people, and the politics around the BBI. So today being our last session, just to echo, we've already done the youth and the BBI, the women agenda and the BBI. And today we felt like it's very key that we address the politics around the BBI and the people at large. So to lay context, we ideally formed the idea of the BBI after the handshake. We had an election whereby for the first time in history we saw the judiciary nullify the existing elections, which led to the formation of the handshake. That was ideally supposed to propagate peace and tranquility in the nation. And part of the initiative that came from the handshake was the Building Bridges initiative, which is the BBI. And today we'll be discussing the politics and the people around this document. So before we get straight into the conversation, I'd like my panel to first introduce themselves, and I will start with the gentleman on my right.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Edwin Kegoli. I am a political and policy analyst and as well as a youth leader.
Yes, we have a political analyst in the building today. I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Paul Nalo. I am a political scientist, youth advisor, and a writer.
Thank you very much. And to our lovely everyday panelist, I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
Jen always introduces me all the time. My name is Stephanie Washira. I am, like she said, a constant panelist here.
Thank you, and Mohammed Abdullahi.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed, for introducing yourself. I think I'll start with Stephanie. We've had this conversation on the BBI and we've tackled the youth and the women agenda. So today, ideally, we want to talk about the politics, specifically the forces that are galvanized behind this BBI agenda. And before we go to the referendum, I think it's very crucial that as we end it, we talk about the politics. So I think I'll start with you to introduce the conversation.
All right, so we'll just jump right into it. And I think I'd ask at this point here, and I'd direct this question to Edwin, being someone who has been in matters BBI constantly. Now, before we even get to the concept of being a proponent of the BBI, we then question, how did the BBI come around, yeah? And I have questions around what we are trying to solve with the document. It is a Building Bridges initiative, and it is supposed to solve the ethnic violence that has been there for the longest time, divisive elections. But then I'd ask you the question is, if our basis for the BBI is the 1992 elections, the 2007 general elections that saw this country go up in flames of ethnic violence, I'd ask you, have we not taken into consideration the concept of state-orchestrated politics? Because is it that Kenyans are now very cognizant of the fact that we are of different tribes and we just cannot coexist in peace around election times? Or is it that there is state machinery that is always in action that brings it to the forefront of the people, that there is now this person is an outsider and this one is not, and which is why we are trying to solve ABCD issues? Do you not feel as if it absolutely ignores the element of it not being really about the people, but the forces that initiate the differences we see in people?
So, Edwin, there's a lot of heat in that question. Do you think that the ethnic division that we have in the country is what is propagating us having this Building Bridges initiative, or ideally it's the state-orchestrated politics? I hope you've understood the question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Indeed, it's a very loaded question, and allow me to tackle it this way. First, what precipitates violence in this country? That's the first question. And what is BBI addressing itself to in terms of that question? And you will realize that in the most recent elections, say that of 2013 and 2017, there have been claims of electoral malpractices around the electoral process. We've seen candidates, presidential candidates, come out and say, I've been rigged out of this election. I won.
It's okay to mention him, our specific candidate in this particular scenario.
Yeah. So we've seen, of course, in 2013, the front runners were President Uhuru Kenyatta and Right Honorable Raila Odinga. And of course, President Kenyatta won, and Raila contested that election in court through a court process, judicial process. So, and after that, again, we had claims that the judiciary was compromised to rule in a particular matter. So you understand, this is now, it became a systemic issue, you understand? So the issue was on the processes of election, the processes. So they said that some electoral commissioners were compromised and were biased, so they could tilt the balance of elections in favor of a candidate. And that, of course, you know what happened. We are Kenyans, alive to history. And of course, unfortunately, we lost people through that process of course, demonstration and all that. Properties destroyed, of course, the economy shrunk, and there are those who lost their jobs through that means. And in 2017, which was like, you know, like it brought into forefront the devastation and, you know, like the tragedies that happened. A 6-month-old baby could fall victim to electoral, chaos. So President Kenyatta and Right Honorable Raila Odinga thought it wise to come together and buy the animosity and the tension that was building up in this country. And with
so is that ideally why we have this document? Yeah. Because we've seen a tone where, because of the chaos that is constant around our election period, we're forming a document that seeks to solve the root of that chaos. I think that is what Stephanie wants to ask.
Yeah, actually, the bedrock of BBI is politics. Like, that is the overriding factor that led to the BBI.
Just to hand it over to her, she seems to have a very burning question.
I think my question is less about, we can see the problem. I am asking, what is the cause of this problem? Because the BBI sets a tone where it transfers the responsibility for ethnic clashes to the people. It says people have fought about the fact that Fulani won the seat and Fulani did not win the seat. And my question then becomes, have we not ignored, up till the point where someone picks a panga and goes against the neighbor, that there is something that is happening here. There is some political interference that we are seeing here. Because if it is setting a tone of it is the people's fault, then where does that leave state machinery?
Yeah, of course, it brings into sharp focus the issue of the server, the infamous server in 2017. You know, like Raila Odinga used to say, we want you guys to open the server so that we can do an audit and understand how these election results were flowing.
So are we saying that politicians are entirely blameless?
No, not blameless.
We're just going to blame either the people themselves or the technicalities around elections.
I think Steph mentioned the issue of state orchestrated. And why would IEBC commissioners tilt favor, you understand, than being impartial and fair, you know, they would want to tilt a result to a particular candidate. You know, you understand? I'm not privy to the internal matters of the IEBC, but of course the aftermath and the results are here for us to see. And clearly the commission was seriously divided in 2017, and that is something that is so unfortunate. Of course, one can argue it is very hard to distance state interference in the electoral matters.
Okay.
I would not absolve the state from that matter, and that is why, like, Raila Odinga laid down the 9-point agenda that he would engage President Kenyatta on in terms of now bringing this BBI into being. But the overriding factor in the BBI, let's not forget, like, why do we have the BBI? It is because of flawed elections. It is because of violent elections. It is because of candidates not believing and having confidence and trust in the electoral body to deliver impartial, fair, you know, like, results. But we fear, like you see right now, people say the current commissioners must be vetted again, and we know, of course, they will not pass that test because of
Is there
how
a lot
things
of
will work.
certainty with that sentiment that they will not
No,
pass
they
the
will
vetting
not pass
process?
that test.
Okay, just to hold that thought right there. Mohammed seems to be burning up already. And just to our audience, you can send in your questions and your comments onto our YouTube page, and we'll be tackling them here. I'll hand it over to Mohammed. Edwin echoes that the key concept around the BBI is the politics and the chaos that we constantly face every other election period. And that, ideally, is the root purpose of us coming up with the Building Bridges initiative.
It's very true, Jean, that our politics are mad, and every election period we witness violence. Violence that the powers that be categorize as ethnic violence. And Edwin equally chooses to categorize it as ethnic violence. But I dare ask him, if we so much hate each other, why does that hate for the other only manifest itself during elections? Why don't tribes get up in arms throughout the other 5-year period in between the elections? Why does that hate only manifest itself in the form of violence during elections?
Just before Edwin answers, I think I'm going to let Nalo introduce his concept. We're having a very back and forth conversation of, is the state at the center of this chaos or political rupture that we experience every other election period, or there's a bigger agenda that we're not aware of currently?
Okay, so personally, I'm of the opinion that we are both disagreeing while trying to agree on the same thing, because I'm convinced that everyone here is concerned about the prosperity and the betterment of this country. Now, back to the basis of the BBI. What we have to give credit for the two principles was calm intentions by choosing the handshake, right? And avoiding exploring further means that would have been hardlining and would have been of devastating effects to Kenyans. Now, the question was, what would come out of it? What would come out of the handshake? What would come out of the BBI? That's what got Kenyans waiting and eager to know, will it solve their problems? We were happy when we had the issue of inclusion, right? But I have reservations with the view of the BBI in terms of inclusion, right?
Before we go into the inclusion, I think I'll now let Edwin answer the question. Mohammed, could you please repeat the question?
It's asking, if we so much hate the other, why does that hate manifest itself in the form of violence only during election period?
Okay, everyone has a very keen interest in that. I think I'll let Edwin start.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mohammed, for that great question. Number one, we need a reason to fight. You know, we can't just wake up and start to fight. And we need to be mobilized to fight. So the only instrument and means within which as Kenyans we can be mobilized to fight is through politics. And that is as a result of flawed systems and ineffective laws and pieces of legislation that cannot take root and punish and even deter offenders. So as
are we exclusively saying that the only reasons why, as Kenyans, as the 47 different tribes that live together every day in these metropolitan cities, have businesses together, are intermarrying, are coexisting, will only choose to disagree during elections?
Yeah, most of the times that is the controlling factor. And I dare say, and I will not run away from it, like, let's just face it. It is politics that has been and will continue to be a problem until we fix it to the letter. So, you see, you're my sister, up to the point politics is not involved. Now when politics come, I'll quickly run to my tribesman or my tribeswoman and say, now I am identifying myself as such a person. We saw what happened in 2007. Who knew such calamity would befall Kenya? Who knew such an incident would befall Kenya, of such devastating consequences? And look at 2007, 2008 post-election violence. It came at a time when the world was going through a global recession. Now, plus the post-electoral violence, that was double tragedy for Kenya. And that's when President Uhuru Kenyatta again developed the stimulus package, now for the first time, to recover the country from the impact of the post-election violence and also to regenerate ourselves from the effects and impact of the global recession. You understand? Mm-hmm. So, two monsters at the same time that at that particular point in time, our economy didn't have the much strength to pull out. But thank God we had President Kibaki, who is an economist and really oversaw the tremendous recovery of our economy. Actually, I don't know what could have happened to our economy if we didn't have somebody like President Mwai Kibaki in power.
I'm going to get an objective view from Nalo. What do you think in regard to Mohammed suggesting that how is it that only during election period is when we have calamity and clashes?
Okay, the answer to that is very simple, and let's not beat around the bush. It is because the collective view of we have as a people, or how we mobilize in Kenyans as a unit, is ethnicity, right? And this is not necessarily the fault of the citizens, okay? This is an expedient tool used by the political class to push their agenda. Now, back to what I was saying. I was happy that in the BBI, one of the key points was inclusivity. But the question is, how are we being included? We can be included beyond our tribes, right? As a people, we can see ourselves beyond ethnicities. For the past 55 years or so, since 1963, we have coalesced in tribes. We have mobilized in tribes. For what good has it served us?
We've organized parties in tribes.
Instead, let us look at inclusion in terms of social welfare, in terms of health, in terms of finance, in terms of youth. Let us have a broader view of inclusion, right? And that's where BBI misses the point. The premise of looking for inclusivity is correct, but we have to look beyond the tribe because it does not serve us, right? So the bone of contention in this question is that every 5 years we fight because of what? We have a parochial view of ourselves as Kenyans. We need to look at ourselves as a talented people, as a diverse people, and as a people who can live together beyond our tribes and be more beyond our ethnicities.
Very passionate.
In fact,
very passionate about viewing ourselves beyond our tribe and our ethnicities and ideally mobilizing beyond the tribe sector.
Yes.
Before we come back to you, Edwin, I think I will hand it over to Stefan so that we can lay context more on the BBI. We've already addressed the issue of the the ethnicity and the violence that we face during election period as the steering wheel to us formulating the BBI. Now, I'll hand it over to her to sector more on this conversation. Yes, Stephanie.
So I think, first of all, before we move on into the specifics of what the BBI proposes in terms of achieving the quote-unquote inclusivity, I'd throw a spanner in the works, and I think I'd ask Edwin, how many people were in the steering committee? There were 14 and 2 co-chairpersons, 9 of whom, that's 16 people, 9 of whom, more than half of whom are politically affiliated to the 2 main people who initiated the drive for the BBI. How can such an exclusive process now purport to bring us an inclusive document? What are the chances that a severely exclusive selection of 16 people is now supposed to purport that they took into consideration all the views of everyone and now decided that this is what Kenyans want? This is not what our political masters want. No. This is what we collectively as Kenyans want.
I'm doing such a very carefully tread on that question.
Well, in fact, if I want to think as a young person, I would say maybe we are not properly even represented on
Is
that.
it a maybe, or are you sure? It's a very bold statement to use maybe. Are you sure that as young people we were actually inclusive in the process of making of the BBI?
Not necessarily. So, first of all, like, you see, I would want to prosecute it this way. First, are they deserving Kenyans for the position? Like, looking at their qualifications, can we trust that they can deliver a credible process that would instill public confidence? And look at persons like Amos Wako, Attorney General Emeritus, of course, Mohamed Haji, Yusuf Haji. Like, these are Kenyans who've served this nation, passionately served the nation. And, people like Adams Olo, experts, those are experts. Whether or not they are affiliated, but we look at now the aftermath. What did they produce? Of course, we've had critics who've poked holes in the BBI saying this provision is not in consonance with the realities on the ground. And we've had also people who come up and say, we've delivered the best document ever. Of course, everybody is pulling on their side. And in terms of inclusivity, like as Stephanie said, like the selection of the 14 from the word go looked very excluding, and then we are talking about inclusivity. So did they deliver something worthwhile? Did they deliver something meaningful?
Okay. Edwin, we get how diplomatic you want to go about this, in the sense that qualifications are the underlining factor here. The concept of inclusivity here is purely based on qualifications. Stephanie, before we come to you, I think I'll hand it over to Mohammed, and we want to specifically discuss the provisions that the BBI makes in regard to the legislature. And I think I'd let you start on those provisions. That is having additional senators, adding 70 members as to represent, as an addition to the 290 that we already have in the National Assembly, and also the concept of the concept of removing the seat for the 47 women representatives. Just your sentiments on the provisions that the BBI makes for the legislature.
To begin with, Jean, I think the doing away with the position of the 47 women reps, I think is a backward position. It's a position that is taking us backwards. The 2010 Constitution required that any public body will have fair representation of both genders. 10 years down the line, Parliament, specifically Parliament, has been the body that has been unable to achieve that. Now to go back and abolish those positions for women, I think is probably a wrong decision. Equally, the extra addition. People have complained a lot that we are expanding the wage bill, we are adding a burden to people, and because our people are not represented enough, then we need more seats. But this is the problem. There are counties which have hardly got any additions in representation, in extra representations. Counties which have essentially since independence been marginalized. Lamu, Tana River, Taita Taveta, Wajir, all of those have hardly gotten any extra meaningful seats in the process. If we cannot fend for those who've been marginalized from the beginning, it comes back, it boils down to the question that Stephanie asked, that extremely this is an exclusive process, a process with purely political goals for people who feel, just as Julius Caesar says in his classical play, that they constantly need to be the northern star in Kenya's politics, that we constantly have to look to them when it comes to Kenyan politics.
I think I'm going to ask this to Nalu.
Mm-hmm.
The provisions of adding more people for representation purposes to the legislature, are we tackling the issue, or we're tackling the facade that we look like we're tackling the issue, in the sense that we have a problem of implementation of government policies and laws? So instead of handling the root causes of why we're not implementing, we're dwelling on let's increase the numbers of people that can help us implement. Are we seeing a mismatch of energy, where energy should be directed in let's implement the issues, but we're focused on let's add the number of people to help us implement the issues?
Okay, so first of all, we are going to have, compared to the legislature we have now, a bloated legislature, meaning we are going to have up to more than 500 legislators. Now, about abolishing the women's rep position, to think of it, it's not quite such a bad move as people think, because there have been misgivings about the performance of women who have been given seats by virtue of their gender identity, right? What we need to do is to fight for equity, okay? Equality might never be achieved because our differences are quite distinct as men and women. But if we create a political environment and matrix where everyone can have a chance to ascend to power, okay, credibly and through a fair process, then that's what we need, okay? Keeping to whether we move women reps to the Senate or not, it will not solve the issue. That's just putting Band-Aid on a sore wound, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the key issue I'd raise with the expanding of the legislature. Another thing I'd like to say is the timing was ill-timed, if I'm to be very candid. If you read the political mood of the country right now, Kenyans are fallen, right? We're in debt distress. The economic is plummeting, right? We have a ravaging pandemic. We're going to spend 14 billion throughout this process. That's a tentative amount. Is it really the time we need to do that? About 2 or 3 weeks back, Zambia have defaulted on their debt. They had $12 trillion rather debt. Our debt is at $7 trillion. Are we far off? Now, one thing we must appreciate, and we are taking for granted as Kenyans, across the regional bloc in East Africa, we are the only country with a semblance of stability, right? Even having this conversation is a privilege, right? So even as we go about this BBI process, I'd urge all Kenyans to be careful, right? To be sober and do what's right for this country.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'll hand over to Stephanie. You seem to have a question.
I think I'll ask on that concept of the legislature, because we're looking at number one, the bloating of the legislature, and number two, why are we bloating the legislature? Yeah? Already, Kenyan legislators are some of the highest paid legislators in the entire world. I mean, you're paid more than first world countries. What are the chances that if we increase this, we are not increasing the wage bill for people? I mean, as it is now, as a Kenyan, would I be pushing for more representation, or would I be pushing for better representation? Do I need more leaders, or do I need the ones who are there to step up? And the second question is the tokenism in the BBI, and I don't know how you'd answer that, because remember, there's a lot of tokenism as it is now, and the BBI proposes for even more. Now, the MCAs in the recent amendments that were done, or the changes that have been proposed recently, the MCAs will now have the chance to be appointed as CECs, yeah? Now, help me understand why county executive committees are there, which was not what was there before. Help me understand why, as a Kenyan, I would not feel as if there is some level of tokenism, because if the BBI is to pass, it has to be agreed upon by at least, or voted for by at least 24 county assemblies. Even if the National Assembly and Senate are not for it, that is what will pass it to a referendum. So why are we giving tokens to MCAs and letting or making governors have to appoint them to CECs, yeah? So that we can have at least the 24 out of 47 threshold met. Help me understand the tokenism in this BBI.
Well, Steph, 2 questions very solid. And number one, when you talk about leaders and in their numbers, you know, what I believe we should be advocating for is efficiency, because we have one president in this country, like leading all of us. One president.
Do we though? I think it's a very critical question. Even the audience is wondering: do we have a tone of a sovereign president in this country? Because how it looks like, he's more of a ceremonial position. His handshake partner will set the tone, and he is to delegate the ceremonies that follow through. Do we really have?
No, we just have a president who is very empathetic, like
empathetic sounds such a...
Yeah, because I mean, he's the commander-in-chief, you know.
Is
like,
he?
Security agencies are directly under him, do you understand? He would have said, I am the president, I'm not relenting, I will suppress any uprising in this country. And what could have happened? All of us can imagine what could have happened after 2017.
Are you alluding that the president sets the tone for the kind of political chaos we have?
Today, if the president said, I'm no longer supporting BBI, what do you think could happen?
So you're agreeing to the question that Stephanie is asking, that the ethnicity and the violence we have in this country is not propagated by the people or the citizens, but rather by the politicians.
No,
you're ideally alluding that the tone that the president sets determines the kind of reaction we have on the ground.
I mean, in fact, in my earlier submissions, I said we need something to be mobilized on, and we need the means to be mobilized. We need somebody to set the tone. Like, we do not want this. We as Tribe A feel left out. So what do? Let's bolt out, let's go cause chaos and mayhem and bring the entire place to a standstill. And looking at the new positions that are being proposed in the BBI, and Steph talked about the wage bill, we should also look at it from the side of the benefit. What has necessitated the increased constituencies, and as well as the women issue? One, BBI is very deliberate on women empowerment in leadership, and it says actually it provides for 15 years within which that clause has to set down, or to go down. Like after 15 years
a
now,
time frame to
yes,
it.
like now everybody will have to fight on their own. We will no longer be talking about gender representation. Like you go out, I go out, whoever wins.
Before we digress, Stephanie's question was on the issue of tokenism.
There were two questions, so I was to come to the tokenism
Okay.
question. Yeah, so you see, when the Constitution talks about equality, what does it mean? That a man and a woman both are equal. And when we go to the polls, it is the people who decide. That's why it is their sovereign right. So they are at liberty either to elect Steph or elect my brother here. So like in that case, it's hard. Now we need affirmative action to meet up the gender gap. Now to the question of tokenism. Yes, there are those who said, like, of course, BBI is dangling tokens here and there so that it passes. But when you want to interrogate this subject very critically, you understand that, you see, like, maybe for example, we saw the Speaker of Kericho and Nandi go to the Supreme Court to seek advisory on whether county assemblies can amend the document. So you want to imagine, Steph, that all the county assemblies in this republic, all of them are proposing amendments. Uasin Gishu proposes, Nairobi County proposes their own. So you can imagine the load, the kind of work that now will be sailing to the National Assembly. So you see, it's so voluminous. We can only give, let's say, the National Assembly or the Senate the power to maybe adjust one or two things, because it's a national building where now leaders across the country are housed. So that would make a lot more sense, that allowing individual assemblies to do the amendment. Now, BBI is not proposing tokens. What it is doing, like you see for MCAs, here the document says we are going to introduce the Ward Development Fund that is supposed to spur economic growth and development, empower innovation and creativity and entrepreneurship of the people at the grassroots level. And that essentially means there is a de-emphasis on the national attention, so that counties are going to play a critical role in terms of empowering young people, putting money in the hands of women, because I've been in rural Kenya and I've seen the great work that women are doing. They're so faithful to whatever they do. Like, look at KWFT, what it has done with women. Like,
before we span around, because I feel like you're giving a lot of airtime to this government of ours. I'll hand it over to Mohammed, and I'll just a second.
Okay.
Edwin here justifies the tokenism in the sense that we reduce the bulk when we include everyone in the formation process. And I have very, very controversial views on that, but I think I'll hand it over to you to clarify on the area.
Jen, it's very interesting because Edwin at some point agrees that the negotiating power that political leaders in this country have is violence, and that they can mobilize their bases and erupt in chaos, and that is the only way that they get negotiating power. very sad, unfortunately. But that is what they usually do, is that they sink the Titanic and they jump ship, and they claim that you fought because of your ethnicity. You did not fight because of the politics, and sadly so. Edwin says that because we want to reduce the volume of the changes that can be made to this document, then we will limit we will limit the changes that county assemblies might need. And it's in a sense to say that you will not be represented. 14 people will go around the country collecting views, and we feel that those views will be a representation of the people. Earlier on, we were having a discussion with Nalo that the whole committee had engagements with about 7,000 Kenyans. And how is 7,000 a representation of 50 million Kenyans? That is the sadness. And Edwin vehemently defends that we do not need to allow the county assemblies to make changes. In essence, we do not want the views of the people. We will think for you. And in his earlier, if I might just digress a little bit, in his earlier statements and in defense of the committee members, unfortunately, Edwin chose probably the worst two members of that committee. This is their history. Amos Wako was Attorney General of this country during the Moi regime. Passed some of the worst laws this country can have. Yusuf Haji, the former defense minister, was the provincial commissioner of Rift Valley during the 92 clashes that the police had a huge hand in. Unfortunately, those are the people that Edwin wants now to paint as the saints, those who will represent.
Expert.
Exactly, unfortunately.
Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you before we circle back to Nalo. I would like us to move to the executive provisions that the BBI has. So I think, Stephanie, you'll wind up on that sector.
I think even before we move on to that, I'd ask Edwin one question. So it is an inclusive process because it took the views of Kenyans, but then because we want to devolve things to the grassroots level, we're really trying to focus attention away from the national government and into the county governments. But the county governments can then not propose amendments to the BBI. I mean, I don't know if you see the irony in that we want the focus to be on the county governments, but they cannot propose amendments. Okay.
In the words of one Ndegwa Kahihu, I hope the AC is on right now because the heat in this room is very much centered on our pro-BBI.
There are two questions I think they should not go away right now. Yes. My brother. You see, let me say this. The two names, the two individuals I said, they are the most clean Kenyans, or the most clean in that panel.
The most ideal
Of course, even if you interrogate the Bible, I'm a Christian. Maybe you can teach me a little bit of the Quran, what it says. But the Bible, God can accept you even after being a sinner. You understand? So, the two leaders have been accepted somewhere, in this within the jurisdiction of Kenya. So that means the people, their constituents, agreed with the agenda. You understand? So I don't say they are the best. But we couldn't have everybody on that panel. We needed a representative figure. And in terms of going around and collecting signatures, he alluded to the number of people who've been interviewed. We cannot practically interview every single Kenya or a Kenyan to Kenya, So
definitely we cannot.
That's why
7,000 is a relatively small number compared
to this is science.
50 million Kenyans.
This is science, you understand? So when we do opinion polls, they also shape opinions of other people, because you can't practically interview everybody. You cannot.
We can't practically, but we have to agree on one facet here in terms of research and infographics. 7,000 is a relatively small amount to be the general representation of 50 million Kenyans, and in a time frame of 1.5 years.
That's why we have every constituency having a member of parliament. You understand? We have constituencies that have over 100,000 registered voters. And now the general population in that constituency is way bigger, considering those who not attained the legal age of voting. So, how did we arrive to a single constituency having one member with such population? You understand? So we also have to appreciate science in that matter. So practically we couldn't interview everybody.
Practicability is what
Yeah.
Edwin argues. Again, to our audience, if you do have questions around the conversation that we're having today on the people and the BBI, please send them your way. We're here to answer those questions. Nalo, as you wind up this segment, and before I pass it to Steph to introduce the provisions of the Prime Minister, and what does that reflect on this document in general? Yes.
Okay, so first of all, we need to calm down and we need to cut Edwin some slack. This is a collaborative discussion. We are all here to enrich each other, right? Now, there's something Mohammed mentioned about ethnic violence that only occurs every other 5 years during after an electoral cycle, right? And goes back to the point I made. Kenyans gather in their tribes because they are dispossessed. Okay? When everything fails, we run back home. What happened when Corona started? Everyone went to their village, they packed their bags, everyone went to the place they identify as home. Now, the tribe is the primordial basis or the primordial home. That's the smallest cocoon, and it's the smallest way we can think to come together as a people. Now, the solution to this thing, right, is empowerment. And I'll give you examples, okay? You go to a county like Makueni right now, they're producing juice. Their governor is doing great things for them. I'm pretty sure, and I can bet my last buck on this, they care not who the president is. Things are working at their level, right? Because they're possessed. I'm sorry, the governor is doing his job, right? Yeah. And resources have come to the ground. Yeah. And that's what we mean by empowering people. Once devolution works, people will stop caring about who's at the top. Now, the second issue is on Steph's question on tokenism. Now, there's a detail we are missing. The BBI outlines clearly that anyone who will serve in the legislature and executive will only get one salary. So the wage bill might not necessarily balloon as we think. That's a clear detail in the BBI. Anyone who will be a member of parliament and elected to the executive or an MCA who becomes a CEC will receive the salary of the one he earns in the legislature. Yeah. That's it. Now, then the BBI deconstructs this idea again, because now they increase the numbers in the legislature. It would have made sense, okay, it would have made sense if we remained with the legislature as it is right now. Then they become CSs and CECs and whatever, and they get the same pay. Then you save us some money, right? But also, that raises fundamental questions about one beautiful thing the 2010 Constitution fought for, which is the separation of powers. Because what the BBI actually is proposing is a parliamentary system. Now, that will bring about a fusion of powers between parliament and executive. Now, parliament's role has been oversight, legislation, and representation. How well have they performed or done at that right now? Your guess is as good as mine. Now, as an independent body, they have been extremely underwhelming in fulfilling their mandate. How will a member of parliament, with the current political class we have now, legislate and oversight himself? Those are the key questions we need to ask ourselves as we push this document.
We have an
forward.
overlap of responsibilities where we cannot have the same people oversight and legislate themselves. Steph,
Yes.
I think I'll let you introduce the provisions of the Prime Minister and the key things that we want to question in that area.
So as we now transition to executive, I think I'll just echo some of the things that Nalo has said and then we can move. Like he said, we just need things to work at the least level, at the counties, at the wards. That's exactly what we need. We don't need 700 more people. No, we need that one person, that one governor, that one senator to be determined to do their job, which is what we have all been saying this whole time. And then, of course, the concept of the wage bill. I like how he's deconstructed it, that we are not saying that they'll be paid double salaries. They had no business being paid double salaries. But, of course, we have bloated the wage bill by increasing the number of people, so it essentially beats the whole purpose. Now, I'll just build up on what Nalo has introduced, the concept of the legislature has a role. Oversight, accountability falls as part of the role of the legislature. So even before we get to the PM, let's talk about the provisions of the BBI that says that a cabinet secretary or a cabinet minister can be drawn. It does not exclusively say they have to be drawn, but it can be drawn from members of parliament. So help me understand, we have had significant scandals in ministries, and whenever that happens, we form ad hoc committees to deal with that and to question why ABCD happens. So I think to a proponent of the BBI, Edwin, I'd ask you, what do you think about the compromising
Nalo
of
has argued we cut some slack to Edwin.
so I'd ask him, just as a proponent, yeah, in a very let's understand this sort of way, yeah, what does that mean for accountability when when a member of parliament who is a minister screws up and then there's corruption in that particular ministry? Is it the same parliamentarians who he sits with who are supposed to now grill him and question him? How did this happen?
Yeah, thank you, Steph, for the great question. I'll bring to sharp focus history what happened to Mheshimiwa Amos Kimunya in Parliament. If like for corruption and impunity to end, Kimunya must go, the Boni Khalwale tune. You guys can all remember. The cabinet then was sitting in the National Assembly. So President Kenyatta, when he took over in 2013, he came during a constitutional dispensation order that had taken the executive away from Parliament. What happened when Madam Anne Waiguru was accused of misappropriating NYS funds? You know, like, can you imagine that situation if she was in Parliament and then we have the opposition? You understand how heated that debate could have been? And with that pressure, she could have resigned even earlier than when she said she needed lighter duties. So I think what President Kenyatta is bringing back here is the executive back to the National Assembly, or bringing the executive back to the people, you know, through the people's representatives. Because right now, the executive is disconnected from the people, save by way of the president, where we only elect the president, and then the president will, you know, appoint cabinet secretaries. Under this new order that is coming through this constitutional amendment is that the president is going to appoint government from people's representatives. So in one way, my MP is my MP, and then he or she is the cabinet minister in charge of finance. You understand? So here, when he's coming to do his primary mandate of, you know, being a member of parliament, we can also ask him questions about why is the economy not working in the manner it should. You understand? So he has got two critical responsibilities that he's delivering on. And I agree with the issue of sitting the executive back in the parliament, because here there is, like, you know, you are where the rubber hits the road. You know, like, you do a little mess, there are MPs there who are independent thinkers. You know, they'll point you out, and of course you'll be in the public limelight, and right now everybody's almost enlightened, and people will question you like, why did you do this? What was the rationale behind it? So it's a great move that personally I think, even if I was not a proponent of BBI, I would see sense in it, that let us take power back to the people through the people's representatives by getting some of them as well.
Let us take power back to the people through the people's representative. Before we come to you, Stephanie Mohammed, I want you to introduce the provisions of the Prime Minister in the BBI. I feel like that's an area we have to discuss.
Absolutely, Jane. And allow me to just go back slightly to what Nalo says. Nalo says that every time we go back to our cocoons, and that cocoon happens to be the tribe, Nalo sees a problem in that. I fault him in that. I do not see a problem in that. The problem is that we do not go back to an identity. The problem is, when does that identity become superior to my neighbor's identity? And when do I use my identity to cause mayhem and to violate the rights of the other? It hardly happens in normal time. Why then does it happen during elections? The problem is not that we go back to that identity. It is okay to have different identities. It's how that identity is misconstrued. Yes, in going to this, the Prime Minister's position, he will be selected he will be appointed with the confirmation of Parliament by the President from the party that has a majority, or the coalition that has a majority. And this is the problem, because the proponents of the BBI paint this to solve the problem of the winner takes it all, that we need an expanded executive that can be the face of Kenya. But Jane, goodwill cannot be legislated. What happens a situation when that authority that has been given to the president is used to achieve political goals. Because it is not always that the people the president appoints, and we have seen it in even lesser appointments, leave that of the prime minister, that hardly those appointments represent the face of Kenya. A poll came out, and about half of all appointments in the civil service were from one tribe. That is the problem we have. When we give the leader the duty to appoint the leader of government business to the president, goodwill will hardly come from Kenyans. It cannot be legislated. It will be at his disposal to select the person that he feels. So I feel that that will be used to achieve political ends and political goals.
Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you.
A very quick question, yeah, so that we can probably just move, yeah. First of all, cabinet secretaries are supposed to be technocrats. They have no reason to probably identify with the people as much as you want to make them seem like that. They're supposed to be removed people who are experts in what they do. When we are looking at MCAs and MPs who now want the degree requirement for them to be MCAs and MPs being scrapped, I wonder where the qualification there will come from. I'm just curious. Now, when you talk about the power structure in introducing a PM and whatnot, I like what Mohammed has said, and I'll echo and make it into a question. What is our guarantee about the independence of a prime minister who's supposed to basically represent or devolve power from the president? If he's a presidential appointee, who can be fired by the president? Same to his 2 DPMs. Number 2, the question of the power structure, yeah? What happens in a 2007 post-election, what happens in a 2007 scenario? Because we have assumed in the BBI, unless there's things that we do not know, we have assumed that it is a guarantee that the people who have the majority in parliament are the ones who are going to elect the president. In 2007, the reason why we had the power sharing is because the people who are the majority in parliament were not the people who the president came from. So in that particular scenario, what agenda is driven in that particular house? What happens when there's a conflict of both agendas?
The heat.
Yeah. BBI in itself is not a super fine document. Like, it's not like flawless, you know. But BBI is coming in as a better or an option to make it better from what we currently have.
There's a rush and a finality to this document that seems to present it as a very perfect and ideal document. Because if we ideally want to create amendments for the better good, why not take time through the process? There's a very critical rush to tunapitisha hiki to as it is. The rest of your opinions will factor it once in a while, and that's it.
But Stephanie, BBI started in 2018. So 2 years down the line. So I do not really understand why.
What about the general public? Because I am very sure, even from our audience that is watching, majority of the people have had this conversation recently.
Yeah, like, you know, also we must have time frames and targets and goals. Like, you know, we cannot just run a race for the sake of running. Like, we must have targets. Are we running a marathon, relay, or like whatever race it is? But again, Stephanie has brought up a very, very critical issue of like, what if, you know, and then the goodwill of the president in appointing the prime minister, and then what happened? So here is the story. So the president appoints the prime minister. Prime minister, according to the referendum bill, is going to serve as the executive assistant to the president. I would say like helping the president amplify executive power. You understand? And again, there has to be accountability. You understand? So that we avoid that situation. The president is in a catch-22 situation. The prime minister has deviated from government agenda, and now they are advancing their own agenda, because now there has to be a leash on how that can be handled. And now the prerogative is on the president to determine the direction of government policy and government directions and decisions. So in that, we see a situation like, for instance, as Steph said, in 2007, we saw, of course, Raila Odinga had many members of parliament. They would have impeached President Kibaki if they wanted, but they didn't. I don't know why. But again, of course, there was that ceasefire of the National Accord. And of course, the country was brought back to stability. So we see now, like in 2022, It's going to be a very interesting election, and a lot of life of this BBI document is going to be given through the pieces of legislation that are going to sail through the National Assembly, because BBI is not proposing every single detail. What it is doing essentially is to parent provisions, like to seat provisions, so that we have reference, like we extract here, like as a river starts from the source, something very small, but as it progresses to where it drains, it becomes huge, and perhaps you'll need a boat to cross. So what BBI says is, like, Kenyans, don't worry, your representatives that you've trusted with the mandate to legislate, oversight, and represent in the National Assembly and Senate are going to make sure that the pieces of legislation will, now carry the weight of the matters. And in that so saying, we are going to have a chance of public participation once again, because in the parliamentary process of legislation, there is that committee stage where now committee invites the public to submit memoranda and write-ups to enhance the legislation that is going to happen.
Allow me to pass it over to Nalo. He's been jotting down his notes for quite the time.
Yeah. Okay, so first, we might have our reservations about BBI. We might have our misgivings about BBI. But as a democracy, we must understand that people must talk for democracies to work. So as much as BBI might be raising a lot of opposing opinions, let us be grateful that it has allowed us to air our voices. Because just like any business, a democracy is always a going concern. So for that reason, we credit the BBI for giving us a platform to finally air our views. Because you know what happens in elections in this country? 2007, there is violence. The two principals meet, and then we are told, accept and move on, right? 2018, there is dispute, they meet, they have a handshake, we are told, accept and move on. But now we have a platform, 2 years before an electioneering period, where we can talk and not worry about who's going to be president in the next 3 months. So we must credit the BBI for giving us that opportunity. Now, another issue I'd like to raise, right, is the issue of constitutionalism, okay? Now, a constitution is a legal document produced from a political process. What Kenyans don't want to acknowledge is that their problem is not a legal one, it is a political one, okay? And constitutions are only as good as the people who remain loyal to them. We may have good laws, okay? But they only become functional if we are loyal and we practice fidelity. Do we have fidelity to our constitution? That's a key question we need to ask ourselves. Have the two protagonists of the handshake been loyal to the previous constitution? That's a key question we have to ask ourselves. Are the amendments they are proposing any better than the ones that they put before, right? So in order for constitutions to work, we must cultivate a culture of fidelity, okay? Now, to the Prime Minister issue. And here, I'll have to be blunt about it. And the BBI was very confused on that issue because he's supposed to come from the majority party in parliament. But as Steph said, what happens in a scenario where the president is from the minority party and then the prime minister comes from the majority party, then we have a dispute like now the president and the deputy president are not getting along. The president decides to fire the PM, then the PM wants to impeach him. So it's a mishmash. It was really an unnecessary position in my view. Yeah.
Okay, I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
And I think at that point I'll ask, because one of the biggest contestations in this particular document, more than anything else, is that PM position. I think I'm very curious to understand, if it is supposed to be, what we were trying to solve was the winner takes all. So number one, in a democracy, isn't that how a democracy is supposed essentially to work, where you do not have everybody who vied somehow getting a seat regardless, because it was, these were the 2 people or these were the 5 people and this is what the people said they want. So why are we still wanting to include all the rest as a way of inclusivity? Number 2, isn't it a very simplistic way to go about peace, to feel as if we have 6 positions that are occupied by 6 different communities, the largest preferably, then we should achieve some semblance of, peace. There is 42 tribes. What happens to the rest of the 36? If they gang up, will we have peace in this country? Number 3, of course, very quickly, Edwin, I'd ask, what is with the assumption that all these 5 people, 6 the president, the deputy president, the PM, the 2 DPMs, the leader of opposition, what is with the assumption that they'll all come from different tribes? I mean, if we have seen, like Mohammed has said, that there is one time when if you do a poll, more than 50 plus 1% of people come from one community. What happens in such a situation where you see the PM, the DPMs coming from the same community? Will we not have just beat the entire purpose? What is our guarantee that moving forward we are looking towards inclusivity and that this is what will work, assuming that that is the very simplistic way we will look at inclusivity?
Edwin.
Well, you see, Stephanie, if you allow me some latitude, I would tackle it this way. In the United States, they do not have a harmonized IEBC like we do. So they certify election results at the state level. You understand? So once the results have been certified, then of course now it's the media to transmitting and all that. And of course that brings into sharp focus the issue of credibility and the system's functioning so well. And here in Kenya, like in 2017, we had, of course, the National Tallying Center, the Bomas, and then all election results are transmitted from like constituency tallying centers to Bomas. Of course, that's where claims came, like there is vote hacking in the air, there is like recalibration of votes, and then what is transmitted from the ground is not necessarily what is received at the headquarters. So you'll transmit 5 results, but they get there when they are 30. So you wonder if there were votes in the air.
To add on to what you're saying, we've already seen a lot of technicalities around election time. And inform me if I'm misinformed, the provisions that the BBI provides in regard to the technicalities around electoral bodies. Because I feel like that is the crucial and most important place we have to start with. Because our elections have always been around the IEBC, kuna shida mahali. What are some of the provisions that the BBI actually puts in place to ensure that we do not have a similar scenario from the previous elections that we've had?
Yeah, in 2017 we had a different electoral body, and then that never saw its term end. Of course, they were removed from office. And then in 2017, we ended up with the same challenge that we had in 2013, mistrust about the electoral process. So here, the BBI is giving like 2 representatives from political parties to sit in the commission, you understand? So we can say there is political representation in the commission, which could work to serve the interest of the largest political parties. You know, like in the US, it's not just the 2 candidates who run for president. There are others who run, but even in the actual debate, they are never captured, you understand? And they're okay with it because, you know, they are just like, I would say, pace setters or
and
what.
Just to further ask, there is a lot of tendency to echo our constitution and our policies with the US. Are we comparing 2 economies that are very different and assuming that the same laws and policies will work for us?
Yeah, sometimes we tend to take in nearly everything West, and maybe we needed to look at an African approach. You know, what works in Kenya.
Specifically, a Kenyan approach.
Yeah, what works here in Kenya. You know, in US, you look at what just happened about the sitting president, Donald Trump, who is now the outgoing president. Imagine he refused to acknowledge that Joe Biden had beaten him. If that was here in Kenya, what could we be looking at right now? You can imagine. So if in US systems function so in such a predictable manner, you know, like his refusal to concede elections did not mean Biden could not assume office. Biden could have assumed office regardless, you understand? So whether or not the president concedes, like systems work in such a way that like on January 20th, he would cease to be president and Biden would be sworn in, you know? So like we need that kind of system, you know? It's not about sticking rules, laws, legislation with the, or like to the president, but we need to stick them with the president so that whether the president agrees with what is happening or not, systems will still function. But here in Kenya, and I gave this example, what if President Kenyatta right now calls media at State House and says, I am formally withdrawing from BBI? What would happen? Of course, you'd see a completely turnaround of everything. You know, the country would be engulfed in so much uncertainty, like there will be so much tension, there will be like, I don't know what that situation could look like.
I get you when you echo on the systems that need to be in place have to fully function for us to talk on the questions of implementation.
Just like we are devolving funds to counties and then following those funds with systems to make sure there is accountability, that more funds will be on the basis of, among other things, your efforts to fight and combat graft.
Okay. Due to the interest of time, I think I'll hand it over to each panelist, and specifically on the area of implementation. Fine, we may form very many documents and we may come up with areas where we can work on representation, but the crucial thing is the implementation of the BBI and the probability of it being a success. That is when the referendum comes, tumepitisha ikitu. So I'll start with Stephanie.
I think I'd ask at this point, what is the practicality of this document? We have had so many others. We've had the Wako report, the Ndungu Land Commission, we've had the TJRC report, we've had so many others. I mean, when we look at, we have the 2010 Constitution that has been here for just 10 years. I mean, it has barely gotten time to seep through this country properly and entrench itself into the fabric of what this nation is. So what happens when we're introducing another document to go on? Why is it that we cannot look at the compilation of all these others and see what they try to solve? When you look at divisive elections and historical injustices, that is what TJRC was all about, you know? So why is there need for us to create a whole different document now and start pushing for it, especially at this sensitive time, you know? That is my question. What is so special about this one that it will not become one of many?
Mohammed, implementation.
What happens, Jane, is that politicians come and go, but governments and systems and especially the civil service and independent bodies are here to stay. And those are the ones who we will hope will implement the amendments to the Constitution if the BBI report passes. And I appreciate Edwin's liking to how state machinery and wheels of government do not stop because a presidential candidate has failed to concede. But again, the BBI, in a way, completely destroys independence of bodies that we got from the 2010 Constitution. When it comes to the IBC, people who will hope will certify and deliver impartial and free elections, we want to put representatives of political parties there. When it comes to the judiciary, we want to introduce a position of judiciary ombudsman who will be appointed by the president. In essence, Edwin and the proponents of BBI are talking from both ends of their mouth because they want wheels of government to move, they want systems to work. But here again they are desecrating the essence of civil service and the wheels of government. They want to combine the legislature and the executive into one, and we fail to get a situation of independence. And the liking that Edwin has for how the wheels of government operate in the United States will not, unfortunately, be delivered by the BBI. Thank you very much.
Edwin, implementation.
Well, if we are honest as Kenyans now and put the interest of Kenya first, I would urge the President and Raila Odinga to implement this document in the best interest forward. Because years down the line, President Kenyatta will not be in power. Raila Odinga will not be there to oversee this BBI. It is us, the young people, who will be tasked to deal with the aftermath of this document. Whether we reject it or vote for it, the consequences will be there. Of course, rejecting it means maintaining the status quo. Accepting it means a new dispensational order. And moving forward, looking at the propositions in terms of empowering young people, empowering women, making sure that systems are functioning well, it comes down to what Mohammed has heavily touched on about the willingness, the goodwill. You know, if even like the current constitution, it's not bad, yeah, just that sometimes circumstances change and necessitate a change in a constitutional order so that we have a document that is alive to the changing times and circumstances. So if we implement the economic angle of BBI and then we are looking at a turnaround that is so massive, that will be that will put Kenya on a head start and you know, put it on a pedestal. But if again we stall the implementation of this document, then we are actually going to see another problem, because first of all, public funds have been invested in this document.
Just to wind up so that we can leave NALO implementation.
First, I'd like to say there's one thing about the BBI I don't like, but it speaks about winner takes all. Now, if you think about that statement deeply, it means that Kenyans are not capable of accepting defeat, which is not true. The problem we have is not a winner takes all, is that we never have a winner serves all. In a democracy, a president is a president of even the people who did not vote for him. So my plea to Kenyans going forward is that when we have an elected leader, if he's legitimate, if we agree with the president, let him serve. My also plea would be to the political class, let us abolish and get rid of the politics of deceit. It's why we are here at this place every time, because we are dishonest with our politics, right? We can agree, we can have one president as long as he works for all of us and he's legitimate. And you know how we'll achieve that? If we invest in institutions and let independent bodies do their work. Does the BBI address that? I'm not so sure. Okay.
Thank you very much, Nalo. In the interest of time, I'll have to cut you short.
Yeah.
He clearly states out that let's have a scenario where the winner serves all instead of the winner takes it all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for our audience for tuning in, and of course our production team for this wonderful panel that we've had here for facilitating this conversation. And until next time, it's adios.